Jessie has for so long been one of the worst brawlers in Brawl Stars, and she's been buffed constantly, but with her most recent rework, she shot to the top of the brawler rankings. She was one of the best brawlers in the game, and so she just got toned down slightly recently. But today, let's look into what exactly pushed Jessie to the top. Now, she got a ton of buffs to her star power Energize, as well as to her super turret in the past few years since she's been slowly getting buffed. But the thing that really pushes her over the top was her attack rework that she just got. So her main attack is really the main thing that keeps her relevant in this meta. Right before they applied the rework, she did 1,288 damage per hit, and you could hit up to 3 opponents, and it would always do 1,288 damage per opponent that you hit. But after the rework, you did 1,568 damage on your first shot, which is a huge damage increase, but then it decreased 25% every time it would hit another opponent. So the second opponent, it would only deal 1,176 damage, which is already less than the 1,288 damage that you were doing before, and then on the very third opponent it would only do 882 damage. This is one of the best balance changes in my opinion that Supercell has ever done, because Jessie has constantly faced a problem like other brawlers in the game like Shelly, where she's fairly good at low levels because people tend to group up a lot because they don't really know how to play the game well and stay alive, and so she thrives in that kind of environment even though she's really bad at higher level trophies. And so whenever you buff her, she ends up just becoming way too broken at the low levels, even though she still won't be that great in the upper levels. But this rework lets her play a lot better at higher levels because her initial damage is going to do more, and typically at higher levels most of your shots are only going to be hitting once because everyone plays spread out and very conservatively. But overall the damage stays relatively constant down at the low levels where you're going to be hitting probably 3 people with a ton of your shots. But at the same time, this damage buff was a bit overtuned because Jessie was very much at the top of the brawler rankings, and now they just came out with a 5.4% nerf to her damage, but the rework is still in place. So you do 1,484 damage for the first time your attack hits an opponent, then 1,113 damage for the second opponent you hit, and 834 damage for the last opponent you can hit. So let's figure out exactly how much this reworked attack improves over the previous attack that we had for high level games. So to do this, I just got data from 7 different games that I played with Jessie, and I calculated how many shots I hit only 1 person with, how many shots I hit 2 people with, and how many shots I hit 3 people with. And I wasn't intentionally trying to do one or the other. I wasn't trying to just hit as many people as possible. I was just trying to do whatever I could to win the game. And these games were about 650 to 700 trophies, so it's not really high trophies, but it's certainly not low trophies either. I think if you went into the even higher trophy ranges, you would get even fewer 2-hit and 3-hit shots. So I think these stats are sort of right in the middle. But what I found was that on average, about 79% of my shots hit only 1 person, 17% of them hit 2 people, and about 4% of them hit 3 people, or 3 targets, because doing 1,484 damage to like a Nita Bear or Mr. P turret is still just as valuable. So I counted those situations as well. And so since I knew exactly how many shots I was hitting, I was able to calculate the total damage I would have done if this was before the rework happens. And then I just directly calculated the total damage I did in game, so after the rework happened and after the nerf happened. And I just divided that by the number of times one of my shots hit people to sort of see what the average damage I would be doing per hit from my attack was. Essentially just reframing this new damage system to be like what it was before. So assuming every shot I hit did the same amount of damage, on average, what would that damage be? And so it turns out, on average, the damage that I would be doing after the rework to Jessie, but before this most recent nerf, would be 1,484 damage per hit, which certainly is a lot more than the 1,288 damage per hit. It's actually a 15.2% increase over that. So that rework they did to her essentially was equivalent to a 15.2% damage buff, at least at the 650 trophy level. And that is really significant, and clearly was enough to push her to become one of the best brawlers in the game. But now after the nerfs that just came out, I did the same thing and figured out that she would do on average 1,405 damage per hit of her attack, which is still a pretty large increase over the 1,288 damage. It's actually a 9.1% damage buff if we went straight from Jessie pre-rework to where she is now. And since I know what percentage of my shots hit 1, 2, or 3 people, we can actually figure out how much damage you can expect to do with a single attack overall. So not just every time your attack hits an opponent, but just the overall damage for a single attack, taking into the account that some attacks will hit more than one person. So pre-rework, when you were doing 1,288 damage per shot, on average that means with a single attack you do 1,614 damage. After the rework, but before the nerf, you would be doing on average 1,859 damage per attack, and now you would be doing 1,761 damage per attack on average. And the difference between those numbers is going to be the same percentage increases that I just said. But I think it's also interesting to look at it from this point of view. So Jessie's been kind of a weird brawler. She has had no real nerfs since 4 years ago, since September 4th, 2017. Everything since then has just been a buff for her. She actually had a very, very slight supercharge rate nerf like a year ago, but that was only for her main attack, and she simultaneously got a supercharge rate buff for her super attack, so I just consider that not a nerf. But excluding that, she got only buffs for the past 4 years, which is kind of insane to think about. She's been a pretty bad brawler for that long of a time. And actually, among her energize buffs and the buff she got to her turret, she got 7 damage balance changes in this time, and 6 of those have been buffs. And the only one that hasn't been, obviously, is just the most recent one. So she received 6 buffs to her main attack damage before she got this most recent nerf, which is kind of crazy. She started out doing only 868 damage per attack, then went up to 1,008, 1,092, 1,148, 1,176, 1,288, and then finally after the rework she went up to 1,568 for the first hit of her attack, and now she's back down to 1,484. But if we're thinking in terms of the average damage you're doing per hit of your attack, and we compare this to 4 years ago, her main attack damage has been buffed 71% at her very peak. So this was before the most recent nerf, and right now she's sitting at a 62% damage increase over where she was at that time 4 years ago. So that's crazy to think about just how much she's been buffed, and it took just this last rework to put her over the top and finally get her to become a good brawler. And now the other aspects of Jessie are certainly good and pair well with her main attack, but her main attack is definitely the main thing that sets her apart in this meta and is going to make her mainly viable. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Sen Squad so that way you don't miss a single video. But that's all for today, guys, so see you later.